Welcome, everybody. How are you doing? Good. Good? Awesome. Nice. Hope you're having an awesome conference so far, and nice to see all of you here. I'm excited to be here. We are excited to be here and talk to you a bit about GraphiQL, specifically the new GraphiQL, basically what has happened over the last year, and not just that, but also the future. Like, where are we headed from here? What do we want to do in GraphiQL? So I'm going to kick us off. Just a very quick intro about me. My name is Thomas. I work at Stellate, where we build GraphQL edge caching. We also have a booth here. If you're interested in what we do, hit us up. We have awesome swag. If you want some of these t-shirts, come drop by. I'm also going to be at the booth, so if you have any questions or anything around GraphiQL after the talk, just come by. And yeah, I'm one of the maintainers of GraphiQL. So I put our little GraphiQL and Stellate logo here. By the way, fun fact, GraphiQL does not have a logo. We sneakily took the GraphiQL logo and put an eye into it. That's not official, it's not a thing. We might want to do that. We might want to make an official logo for that. Who thinks this should be official? All right. So, some people, not too many. We look into it. All right. So yeah, let's talk about GraphiQL. And when we mention new in the talk title, there also needs to be something old, right? So let's maybe touch base. Where do we come from? So when we talk about the old GraphiQL, what we talk about today is GraphiQL version 1. Back in the day, you could even say it was just GraphiQL, since there was just one version, just GraphiQL. So maybe a quick show of hands. Who of the people in the room have seen this screen before? Wow. All right, that is, for the people watching, that was nearly everybody, which honestly, to me, that's not surprising. At least I remember when I got started with GraphiQL, when I learned GraphiQL, this was the screen where I sent my first GraphiQL request. It was like the first time where I could see the magic of GraphiQL, where I had my query and then the response that matched the query and all this good stuff. And for years, I think GraphiQL has been the tool for people coming into GraphiQL to learn and explore GraphiQL. But then GraphiQL matured and took on traction, and people wanted more out of a GraphQL IDE. And when people want more, people also obviously build more. So maybe again, a show of hands, who of you have seen this screen? Okay, that's a bit less, but still I think the majority in the room. This is the GraphiQL Playground. This came out in 2017, built by a company now known as Prisma. And it was showing the community an iteration. What could a GraphiQL IDE become? And it had a lot of new powerful features. Like on top, for example, you see there are tabs, so you were not just limited writing a single query, you could write multiple queries in different tabs. Of course, a different layout, new design, and also a bunch of settings that you could use to customize this IDE. Eventually, the playground was also handed over to the GraphQL Foundation. So at that point, we maintainers basically started thinking about, okay, now we have these two IDEs, where do we want to go from here? What is the next thing that we want to bring into the world of GraphQL IDEs? And specifically, we tried to think about, okay, what are, also having seen the playground and so other IDEs, what are the limitations that we saw in GraphiQL in this version 1? And on a very high level, we pinned it down to those three things. We had limited functionality, which the playground clearly showed us, things like tabs were things that people wanted, that GraphiQL just didn't have. It was also hard to extend the functionality. You could add a button in one or two places, but that was basically it. You were not able to really add your custom stuff into GraphiQL. And it was hard to customize. If you wanted an IDE that looked or felt different, then yeah, you you had a lot of fun times overriding dozens of CSS classes and adding some new colors or stuff. So that was very tedious. And all of that basically informed what we did for what we now call GraphiQL version 2. And again, final show of hands. Who of you have seen the screen? Less than version 1, okay. A bit disappointing, but okay. We'll get there. Now you've seen it. This is what we've done for GraphiQL version 2. And you again see there's like a new layout here. We got kind of inspired by how other quite popular IDEs do things, like, for example, on the left side, you see a new sidebar where you have all your main controls. From there on, you can open different panes, like, for example, in the screenshot, you see the docs are currently open, but we also have a history tab and different things. And on the right side, you see the familiar kind of editor where you can write your query and the response next to it. And we also now support tabs in GraphiQL, for example. It's a bit hidden, but very much intentional. We wanted to keep the UI quite lean. But in the top right, you see the little plus icon. And if you click that, you can now also add tabs in GraphiQL. And of course, or maybe for some people, most importantly, we also finally shipped a dark mode, because apparently developers do really love their dark mode. I think this was, for years, one of the most requested features in GraphiQL, and with version 2, we finally shipped it. I did a bit of research and looked around in the ecosystem, because GraphiQL version 1 was released when GraphiQL itself was released. It was in 2015. And version 2 came out, I think, around 1 year ago. So we had 7 whole years of GraphiQL version 1, and now only 1 year of version 2. So I was a bit interested. How is it getting along? How are people adapting the new version that we've built? And I was actually quite delighted that a lot of tools and frameworks have since switched over and used the new version 2. So things like, obviously, GraphiQL Yoga, maintained by the Guild, Mercurius, which is another JavaScript-based server implementation, but also across a variety of different languages. So we have GraphiQL Go, GraphiQL Kotlin, Strawberry, which is based on Python, and Juniper, which is based on Rust. And obviously, this is a non-exhaustive list. There's probably way more out there, so don't be mad at me if there's something that I didn't mention here. Anyway, to sum up, what were the main improvements that we wanted to ship, or that we hope we shipped with GraphiQL version 2? We have the new design, a refreshed look that's a bit more modern, which I have just showed you on the slide before. And one thing I want to highlight is how we overcame the limitation around customization, in particular the customizing the UI side of things. The new design is entirely built or the tokens that make up the new design, like colors, spacings, a bunch of other things. Those are all now stored in CSS variables. So now if you want to just have a new coat of paint on your GraphiQL, you just need to override a bunch of CSS variables. We hope we made that a lot easier compared to how that was in version 1. And if you remember, the other limitations that we saw in version 1 were around functionality and extensibility. And obviously, we also wanted to improve on that side. And what we did here was shipping a very simple plugin API, which allows you today to add your own functionality into GraphiQL. And also, even beyond that, we released a new so-called what we call SDK package called @GraphiQL React, but more on that in a second. Because first I want to talk a bit about plugins. Specifically, when working on version 2, we learned that there's one very popular plugin that already existed for version 1. You might have heard of it. It's called the GraphiQL Explorer. It was used in a lot of instances of GraphiQL that we saw, and people obviously loved it. So we wanted to have, of course, also support for adding that in the version 2 that we set out to build. However, in version 1, the GraphiQL Explorer was implemented as a wrapper around the whole GraphiQL UI. Whereas in version 2, we wanted to encourage more of these kind of extensions and plugins. So we wanted a more native and built-in way for people to add the functionality into GraphiQL. And that's how we ended up adding what we call a plugin API into GraphiQL. So as of today, you can just write your own React component and inject that into the GraphiQL UI. Specifically here on the right side, you see the screenshot shows you an example of the just mentioned GraphiQL Explorer. Here on the left side in the sidebar, you see there's a new icon when I add this plugin. And this icon now toggles the familiar GraphiQL Explorer UI, where I can just click specific fields and add and remove them from my query. And of course, that's just one example. You could write your own kind of plugin. We also have seen a lot of people write their own plugins. We have something like a code exporter, where you can just with one click export the current query like for your React component or something like that. And yeah, there's no limitations of what you can put into the left side of this screen. But we noticed this actually isn't enough still. When we looked through our GitHub issues, we had tons of issues where it's just like, can you maybe add this tiny bit of functionality here, or can I maybe customize this one thing with a setting? And we thought about if we would build all of that into GraphiQL, we would probably end up with a React component that has, I don't know, 100 props. Or if you made all of that available in plugins, we would end up with like a plugin API with dozens of options. And we figured this is neither really a good developer experience for you, neither is it really maintainable for us. So we tried to come up with different ideas. How can we solve that? And the idea, the premise that we basically ended on was, instead of building everything into GraphiQL, we wanted to enable you, the community, to just build your own GraphQL IDEs with ease. And that's where the SDK package called @GraphiQL React comes into play, which I mentioned earlier. In GraphiQL version 1, we basically had one very, very big, thousands of lines of code React component, which managed all the state of GraphiQL and most of the UI. For version 2, we started splitting all of this up into smaller parts. We separated the state from the UI, so the state now lives into separate React contexts. You can consume the state and manage the state with hooks. And we have a lot of UI components, from low-level primitives like buttons, for example, up to more complex and composite patterns like, for example, the docs. And after breaking this up, we took all of these individual building blocks and published them within one package to NPM, which is the package we call @GraphiQL React. So maybe to give you an example of what can you do with this. One example of what we did at Stellate, can you see here in the screenshot. We wanted to have, in our dashboard, we wanted to have a IDE, which was kind of very lightweight, but integrated so that people can run some queries right from within the dashboard without actually having to leave our dashboard UI. And so basically that's what we were able to build. We just took those same building blocks from that the GraphiQL UI also use. Then we kind of picked out the ones that we didn't want to have, because again, we wanted something that was minimal. We added in some specifics that were useful to our case. So for example, below the response, you see a cache hit indicator. Wrapped it in a modal, and we were able to basically within, I don't know, a day or two of work, publish that onto our dashboard. Another example of what you could build with this is like your whole complete IDE. This is an example called Pathfinder, which is built by one of our co-maintainers, John. I saw John here earlier. John, that's John. And this initially started out as a proof of concept for the design ideas that we had for version 2. But it's eventually evolved into its own IDE, which is now used also by GraphBase. And you see a lot of similar things compared to the GraphiQL UI that I showed you previously, just maybe arranged in a bit different order, so you could easily build this with these building blocks that we provide with the package. Funny enough, this one IDE is even ahead of the curve because it already uses a new code editor, which is called Monaco. And that's the same code editor that VS Code also uses, that I believe most of you are familiar with from that side. But before I now go into details about that, that's the perfect place for me to now hand it over to Dima, who will tell you more about, because obviously GraphiQL version 2 is not the end of the road. That's basically where we are today. And we also want to talk about the future and the next major versions. And for me, that's the perfect place now to hand it over to Dima, who's going to tell you all about that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dimitri Postolov, and I am full-stack developer, open source developer from the Guild. I am born in Ukraine, and now I live in Paris for about 10 years. Currently, I am maintainer of 3 libraries. Is GraphQL ESLint, Nextra, and GraphiQL. Does anybody use it, GraphQL ESLint, from you? Oh, nice. And Nextra? Okay. So, you go next. So, GraphiQL v3 was released. Somebody already tried it? Not a lot of people, okay. Basically, if you use it GraphiQL v2, it's like improved version of GraphiQL v2. When I come to new project, I always start by improving code base. And that was in GraphiQL monorepo itself, because GraphiQL monorepo, it's not only GraphiQL, but it's a lot of packages like Code Mirror, Monaco GraphQL, GraphQL language service, and GraphiQL examples. So I decided to extend various ESLint recommended config, and it was done. And it was done with ton of separated pairs. I pushed a lot of efforts for it. I fixed all errors and warning in terminal. So the main problem of GraphiQL v2 was Rich UI was deprecated and didn't get support of React 18. And I fixed it by migrating to headless and Radix. With it, I included tab reorder features. Yeah, it's like simple features, but community asked for it. And favorites in history tabs. So the point, the summary of GraphiQL v2 is better code base, various ESLint config was extended, React 18 support, tab reorder, and favorites in history tab. And now we come to GraphiQL v4. By the way, for the version v3, you must know that this is like a bridge for the future. So we start with GraphiQL v4. So the main feature of graphical v4 will be integrating of Monaco editor and Monaco GraphQL. Here you can see the demo screen of integrated Monaco editor, and it's not only Figma design, it's already working prototype that you can find in active PRs of GraphiQL. With it, GraphiQL will have support of JSON-C comments. JSON-C comments in variables and headers editors. And the first issue of adding this support was asked 4 years ago. So it was a long time, and now this comes in v4 version. Here is little demo. I show you that you could use it. With it, I have also idea of integrating GraphQL ESLint as a plugin for GraphiQL. You will ask me why. I will respond to fix your validation errors, to have customizable way of enabling rules for your operations. With Monaco editor, you can already do it thanks to Monaco GraphQL. But the main disadvantage of Monaco GraphQL is that you can't apply fix. And with integrated GraphQL ESLint, you could do it like in your VS Code. Also, I want to mention then after years of graphical development, GraphiQL will have also own website of documentation thanks to Nextra. So, and this is a summary of GraphQL v4 Monaco editor, Monaco GraphQL, JSON-C comments in variables and headers editors, GraphQL ESLint plugin for validating your operations and fixing errors, and GraphiQL documentation website. And here is a little table of comparison. GraphiQL v2 used CodeMirror as editor and used deprecated ReachtUI. GraphiQL v3 use still CodeMirror and Radix and headless UI. And GraphiQL v4 will be used Monaco editor, Radix, and headless UI as components. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Will plugin API support like almost like middleware? So if we wanted to add like roll-off flows to or like to GraphiQL, could we do that with plugin?
So the question was if the plugin API supports like middlewares. The plugin API itself is currently very focused on the UI part. We have also a concept what we call fetcher. So each instance of GraphiQL defines like a fetcher function, which actually performs the request to your GraphiQL backend. And inside this fetcher function, you could add also arbitrary logic. So you could, for example, I don't know, add some headers or do some things with the response, or whatever you like. So that's something which we didn't explicitly mention in this talk, but also a way of customizing, like how GraphiQL behaves in this case, how it sends the request to the origins.
Somebody else? Okay. Thank you. See you in Guild booth and Stellate booth.
you very much.